Well, thank you very much. It's really a great pleasure to take part in this Hot Topics debate. I'm afraid you've not got Gordon Gekko or Richard Branson. You've got me, just an ordinary general surgeon, a day-to-day surgeon. And I come to this debate with no preconceived political ideas. I come as someone on the front line, and I'm going to try and tell you how I see it. Now, I think the simple answer to the question, private sector involvement in NHS patients, the delivery of care, is it a threat or an opportunity? The simple answer is it's both. Now, the balance of how much of a threat compared to how much of an opportunity is involved depends probably on where your standpoint is. I'm sure if you're the owner of a private hospital, you will see it very much as an opportunity. I would hope to convince you that the threats are maybe less than they might be thought to be, and that the opportunities maybe outweigh the benefits. Now, as I say, I'm a general surgeon, and although it's not trendy to say it, I enjoy my job. Actually, I would say I love my job. I like coming in, I like seeing patients. More than anything else, I like operating on patients and hopefully seeing them going home. What I hate is this. Now, it's a nice enough coffee room, Aberdeen Royal Infirmary's theatre coffee room. This was it yesterday morning. But if you look at the time, I hope you can see that all the lists were meant to start at 8:30, and it's nearly an hour later, and no one's moved. We have 2 general surgical teams in there, we have an orthopaedic team, we have an ENT team, we have a plastic surgery team in there. And this is what drives me mad, and I think it drives most of us mad. Why is this happening? Why, when we all like what we do, we want to do a good job for our patients, why do we hear in the papers about failing hospitals, about A&E departments overflowing, about whistleblowers being forced out of their jobs? Why is this the case? Well, undoubtedly, we are facing problems in the NHS. There is no doubt about it. We are dealing with an increasingly ageing population. And the fact is, as we get older, the demands we make on the health service are going to increase. We're dealing with changes in lifestyle diseases. The obesity epidemic is well known. 60% of us are now overweight. The results on the needs for healthcare are huge. We also have increasing research into new drugs, new treatments. Of course, this is a good thing, but again, there's higher expectations in what we can deliver. So we've got all these demands being placed upon us. We have internal problems as well. And of course, we have financial constraints placed upon us, as we know all too well. We've all heard of the need to be prudent and to save money. We've heard of the Nicholson Challenge to have a 20% more efficient service, but we're not getting any increased funding from this. So what can we do to turn this around? We have to do something. Is it easy to turn the NHS around? Well, unfortunately, it's not. It's a huge juggernaut. It employs, or we employ as the NHS, 1.7 million people. It's only behind the Chinese army and the Indian railways as an employer of people in the world. And some people might argue Walmart's close as well, but we're up there. It's top-heavy with bureaucracy. It's very difficult to effect change. And it's overridden with conservatism, with a small c, I should say. People don't like doing things differently. I have a friend that's a mathematician who models systems. And until recently, the most complex system he had modeled was the missile guidance system. Now, apparently, that can veer in 3 dimensions away from the ideal course. It can go not as fast as it should do, it can go too slowly, it can go to the left, it can go to the right, it can go up or down. Each one puts everything else off course. The model that he came up with for the NHS was that we would diverge in 4 dimensions. So if, for instance, we increase the amount of bariatric surgery to meet international guidelines, it will take away from the provision of general surgery, and it will increase the demand for HDU, ITU beds, and it will affect everything else that goes through. So is the private sector the answer? Well, it's not the whole answer. We know that there are problems with private sector involvement. I wouldn't like to suggest anything other than that. But the private sector, although there are problems, and it's riven with conservatism as well, perhaps with a capital C rather than a small c in this occasion, but it is able to react. It does have spare capacity. It does offer us potential solutions to some of the problems that we're all facing. It does offer our patients, perhaps most importantly, some solutions. Now, I'll make no apologies. I'm going to concentrate most of what I'm going to say about my practice as a surgeon, because that's what I know most about. Now, this is hernia operations in Aberdeen. There's about 800 hernias required to be done every year in Aberdeen to stay at a sustainable level. Although we might think we're doing quite well in our day case, going up a little bit, the bottom line is that every year, year on year, we reduce the number of hernias that we are doing. This builds up a backlog. Now, the trouble is that the rules of the trust are that they're not allowed to have a backlog building up. They have to sort this somehow. And the easy thing to do, of course, is to outsource this to one of the private providers who will charge a small fortune and will end up robbing the other system. Can we act more efficiently? Well, yes, is the answer. I did a pilot study just over a year and a half ago where we looked at doing every hernia we possibly could under local anaesthetic. It reduced the number of laparoscopic procedures by about 60%. It meant that we could be far more efficient in theatre. We choreographed it so that we could get 12 patients done in a day. So on a good day, 14. It doubled the productivity. You would have thought this would be ideal for the NHS. It wasn't. It was regarded by our management staff as unbalancing the system. It was going to disadvantage patients with gallbladder surgery being done or something else. So we weren't allowed to do this in the NHS. We ended up providing it privately at weekends. This patient-centred approach, doing everything we could under local anaesthetic, choreographing the thing, allowed us to get through 273 hernias, with a cost saving in theatre time alone of just over £200,000 and close to £60,000 in ward time, and that's doubling productivity. Now, of course, I need paid for that. Of course, my company needs to take money out of that. How else am I going to employ the necessary secretaries, admin assistants? Why shouldn't I get paid for spending every weekend for 6 months either administering or doing hernias? But what I would suggest is that this is adding value to the value chain. This, rather than outsourcing to someone who is purely interested in taking the maximum profit from this, we can provide this service in cost, make a profit, and hopefully provide a better service. Here's another example, a ward that we were involved in looking after. This isn't the ward. The wards that we have now are the super-duper 1960s wards in Aberdeen, which the fire chief has told us are condemned. These wards are still standing and working very well. But we had an idea, quite a good idea, over the winter to have a step-down unit for patients not requiring intensive medical intervention that needed nursing care before they could go home. The trouble was, this 20-bed ward soon became blocked with patients who had nowhere else to go. As a result, we couldn't recruit staff to the ward, and the length of stay was just increasing. So that what was a very good initiative floundered. We took it over, the running of this, and by employing one extra member of staff who had significant expertise in the community and in social care, we managed to double the throughput of that ward. From a standard stay of 10 days, it went down to 5 days when we took this on. Pure and simply by having the flexibility to employ the people with the skills we needed. Sorry, I'll come to that in a minute. There are other examples. We can increase the productivity of endoscopists. Of the standard minor procedures that are easy to do, I believe that the private sector has something to offer. It adds value to the value step. But I would suggest it's not all black and white. It's not all good. It's not all bad. I think we've got to say, if the one side of the private sector is that we can be more reactive and produce more innovative solutions, changes in the way we work, we also have to make sure there's the appropriate checks and balances put into that. Training, we see in the survey, is of major concern. Why can't that be put into the contract that anyone signs as a private provider? There's no reason it can't be. So I would suggest that we have to look at appropriate balances in any contracts. I would also suggest that there is an appropriate moral requirement of anyone taking any of these contracts. And that moral requirement is to do what you say you're going to do. It is very worrying that some of the large private healthcare providers are structured in the same way as the Southern Cross Group, such that their properties are separate from their operational aspect. And it leaves the possibility that if the property prices were good enough, they might leave. And this is the market. And the problem with that, of course, is we're leaving people high and dry. So again, it all comes down to appropriate contracting if we don't want another Southern Cross debacle on our hands. It also, I would suggest, means that there has to be a moral authority as well as a responsibility to shareholders. To try and bring it all together, I would suggest that private involvement in the NHS is like dark matter. It's there. We don't know that it's there all the time. Most of the time, we're completely unaware of it. But every time we sign a prescription, we are involving the private sector. Every time we send someone down to X-ray or for a CT, or any time that we use an instrument in theatre, we are involving the private sector in care. Let's face it, all of us are profiting for our time that we spend in the NHS. We get paid a salary. Contracts were renegotiated in 2003. Most people signed up to a higher level of income. They are profiting. It's regarded as a reasonable amount of profit that they are making out of the value they bring. I would suggest that private sector involvement has to do exactly the same. If it does, it offers a golden opportunity. It's only perhaps when we get into a conflict here, for instance, the meningitis vaccine, where people were seen to be wanting too much profit out of what they wanted, that there is potentially a problem. The NHS is the largest provider of healthcare in Western Europe. I would suggest that the NHS should use that position to dominate and manipulate the market to get favourable deals in contracting. This is Michael Porter's 5 points about sustainability of a company. We've heard about some of Michael Porter's ideas earlier this afternoon. But this is saying that the attractiveness of a business depends on the threats of alternative services, the threat of new entrants, the bargaining power of suppliers, and the bargaining power of purchasers. Now, the NHS as a purchaser is huge in the private sector. The NHS controls any barriers to new entrants on teaching and everything else that we want to put into it. I would suggest, therefore, that there is a real opportunity in private involvement. It just has to be managed very appropriately. And finally, this is just to show that we do get nice weather in Aberdeen as well. I took this picture out of the train the other day on the way south of Aberdeen. Thank you very much.